King, comfort of the Spirit, truth, who Lord, President, full of soul, things, treasure, blessings, and giver of life. Come and abide us and cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls, O good.
Vladika, the reference that you gave last week for a good theological foundation on the books, what was it again? I didn't make a note. You were talking about the a sound, reliable reference to interpret that from the Holy Fathers, sort of interpreting.
Oh, there's a series of books from InterVarsity Press. I think Thomas Oden is the editor. Forget what it's called offhand. It's just the New Testament. Okay, ancient Christian commentary on the Scriptures. And it's 30-some volumes.
30?
30, yeah, it's huge.
That's a lot of commentary.
But what it is that it goes through verse by verse, essentially, or section, and presents all the patristic commentaries on those verses. So you may have 4 or 5 different fathers commenting on those particular verses, or on themes within those verses. And so it's extremely valuable.
Wow, very good.
Yeah. I had a full copy of a full set of the books when I was in the monastery in California, which I had to leave. But you can get them electronically.
Yeah, and I'm making a note in here so that I don't forget again.
Either through Logos or Accordance, biblical programs, Bible programs. You can probably get them on Amazon, but I don't know what the full set would be. Wouldn't be cheap. So, but to buy each volume individually is like $40 a volume.
So Universal Press?
No, InterVarsity.
Oh, University.
InterVarsity.
Yeah, because for something, believe it or not, because even that, it's fairly complex. It was funny because I was attending a Bible class once, and they ran out of Bibles, and they gave me one that was a children's Bible.
Yeah,
and I liked this. Okay, let me see if I can graduate from the children's Bible. And I was primarily leveraging the footnotes from the Orthodox Bible study. And based on your commentary last week, I said, well, maybe I should look into something else, because I don't know what in those comments are misleading or not.
Well, actually, the comments in the Orthodox study Bible, they're not bad. They're not misleading. It's just that they're very simple, and they don't take into account the complexities in the text. It's not a textual commentary. It's a commentary as to theological meaning.
Wow. You see, Vladika, how far I have to go, because even those commentaries, as simple as they are, they're very complicated to me. It just goes to show how far I am.
Right, but there is some complexity in the theological, issues that they bring up, but it's not a commentary on the structure of the text itself.
Got you.
Okay.
Got you.
And the text has a structure. It has a history. It has its own inner kind of dynamic.
The context.
And the fathers didn't work with that stuff for the most part. That wasn't their interest. That's post 19th century, not 19th century, 20th century, 21st biblical studies, and so.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's the difference between looking for the you know, for the depth from a theological standpoint versus the historical context, etc. only.
Right.
Okay.
Because what the historical context and a lot of what the Protestant commentators were looking for is what was the meaning to the people at the time that it was being written. Now that you need a whole lot of cultural historical background to understand that. Because what it meant to them and what it meant 500 years later, and 500 years later, and 500 years after that, and now 2,000 years later, is going to be a whole lot different.
Yeah, yeah.
And just the meaning of the language is a whole lot different. So.
Very good.
Yeah.
So we'll start 1 out of 30. To see how long it's going to take to get through one. Thank you, Veronica.
So what else? Anything else?
Well, there's the idea of Melchizedek that comes up again and again, almost as an archetypal figure, or as whether he was actually lived, whether he's relegated to sort of a certain era in history. I mean, it's sort of a big mystery about him.
Of Melchizedek?
Melchizedek.
Yeah. Well, it is a great mystery, and evidently there's a lot in a huge amount of Jewish mystical literature that revolves around Melchizedek. And some of that would have been what floated around in the time of Jesus, and that he and the apostles would have been familiar with.
Did Jesus have attribute himself, or is there any sort of correlation with his being looking at himself as being a continuation of that, where he would voice that himself?
I don't remember him saying that, but it certainly was within. It would have been within the context.
Yeah.
Of his immediate circle, so he could very well have taught about that. You know, we only have a very small amount of what Jesus actually taught. You know, it's just a few discourses.
That's what's amazing. Yeah.
You know, and you know, and then Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I mean, a lot of their material is simply repetitions, and from different contexts, and so. You know, and then John provides other material. Then there's also other sources of material from Jesus called the Agrapha, which is the unwritten or non-scriptural writing or sayings of Jesus. So, and they're in all sorts of different things, in Gnostic texts and in others. And, you know, the scholars consider some of it to be possibly authentic. Thank you. And some of it to be spurious. So, anyway, so tonight it's chapter 12, and we have one more evening on the book of Hebrews. Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher or perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. You have not yet resisted to bloodshed, striving against sin, and you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves he chastens, and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chastened us, as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless afterward it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Therefore strengthen the hands which hang down, and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord, looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled, lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, or for one morsel of food sold his birthright. For you know that afterwards, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently with tears. There's not a whole lot of technical language in this, so it's fairly clear. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Well, it's a beautiful image, but I think it's also important for us to remember from the book of Revelations, or the Revelation. So, this is Revelation chapter 5, starting with verse 8. Now when he had taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each having a harp and golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. So great a cloud of witnesses, bowls with the incense going up, with the prayers of the saints. And they sang a new song, saying, You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain, and have redeemed us to God by your blood, out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation, and have made us kings and priests to our God, and we shall reign on the earth. Then I looked, and I heard the voice of many angels around the throne, the living creatures and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000, and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing, and every creature which is in heaven and on the earth and under the earth, and such as are in the sea, and all that are in them, I heard saying, Blessing and honor and glory and power be to him who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb forever. Then the 4 living creatures said, Amen. And the 24 elders fell down and worshipped him who lives forever and ever. So, this is the image that this text essentially is referring to. Not directly, but by inference. We're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, all of the cloud, which is so great a cloud of martyrs. And where are the martyrs? They're under the throne. Let's see, where is it? Okay, let's jump to Revelation chapter 7, verse 9. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. And all the angels stood around the throne, and the elders and the four living creatures, and fell on their faces before the throne, and worshipped God, saying, Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, Who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? So he said to me, These are the ones who have come out of the great tribulation, and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they are before the throne of God, and serve him day and night in his temple. And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them, and so forth. So you've got this heavenly vision of all the angels and the archangels and the 24 elders, and all standing around the throne of God and of the Lamb of Christ, giving praise and glory with the clouds of incense, which are the prayers of the saints ascending. So great a cloud of witnesses has not only means such a great multitude, but it also refers to this vision. Let us, it says, since we are surrounded, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher, or perfecter in Greek, of our faith. In other words, our task is like a race. It's like an athletic struggle in the arena that we have to, in which we're following Christ and encouraged by Christ. And so there's an aspect of being cheered on by these great multitudes of the saints, the martyrs who have gone before us. Looking unto Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. So, obviously, the text implies that Jesus understood that he the glory that he had, that he would return to the glory that he had with his Father, and that joy, that glory is what strengthened him to be able to endure the cross and to run the race to the end, enduring even torture, crucifixion, and death. And despising the shame. Well, the shame, crucifixion was a great shame. And has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And that refers back, of course, also to the book Revelations, beginning of chapter 5, where it talks about Christ being enthroned with the Father. So this vision of the book of the Revelation is the inspiring vision that kept people going, that kept the Christians going, and that awareness that of the saints who had gone before, and their witness to paid for by their lives to Christ and to this vision, to this hope, is that motivation to keep going, and to hold fast. So much of the book is an exhortation to hold fast to the faith and not to flag, not to hesitate, and not to fall away.
So the author of Hebrews was aware of the Book of Revelation? And
Probably.
So it preceded it to some extent?
Yeah, I mean, whether it was in its final form or not is a different story.
Yeah.
But certainly the material was there, was floating around. Verse 3, For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. You have not yet resisted to bloodshed, striving against sin. And so we're entreated to look at Jesus, who endured such hostility even to the point of torture and death, for the sake of the message and the witness that he bore, and yet we ourselves, have not struggled against sin to the point of shedding blood. And you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord. Now this is a really, I think, important passage. We want to go with the whole Joel Osteen kind of message that if you're a Christian, great things are going to happen to you, and you're going to become rich, and you're going to get the best jobs, and you're going to have everything you want. And you're going to live in a big mansion. You can have a pink Cadillac, the whole bit. And that's not the case. And that's unfortunately why so many people become so bitterly disappointed with what they think is Christianity and which is not. But rather, the author of Hebrews is very specific that that those whom the Lord loves as his sons, he chastens, and that chastening is something hard to endure, and especially when you're in the middle of it, it's very hard to realize what's going on. You just think, oh, why me? What happened to my, my wonderful spirituality where everything was light and joy and grace and peace, and everybody loved me and I loved everybody, and instead you get gossip and slander and brutal treatment and even being murdered. And how many people, even in our own day, are being murdered for the sake of their confession of Christ in the Middle East? How many people in the last century, in Russia and throughout Eastern Europe, were slaughtered for the sake of the name of Jesus Christ, their witness to Jesus Christ? They thought they had great clouds of witnesses at the time of the Roman Empire. They hadn't gotten to the 20th century, My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and scourges every son whom he receives. Now, chastening, well, what does chastening mean? It can mean a lecture, right? Kind of being put in your room and you can't have the car keys for a while, and can't play with your video games, and maybe you get your cell phone privileges revoked or something like that, right? That's chastening, right? Right. He's talking about scourging. Scourging, with a cat of nine tails, which had little barbs on them, which take the flesh off of your back. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges. This is the bad news of the good news, as Father Hopko used to say. And it is the bad news of the good news, because we do start off, with all of these, you get so proud of yourself, you're getting spiritual, you're fasting twice a week, you're praying twice a day, you're going to church, you're going to confession, everything is rosy, and then all of a sudden, bang! But it has to happen. And part of the thing is, it is critical for it to happen. And if it doesn't happen, what is that saying?
There's something wrong.
It means there's something very wrong. There's a wonderful story from the Desert Fathers, and this monk was out in the desert, and everything was going right. There were no big temptations. He had everything that he needed. People were coming to him. He was, and he said, "Lord, why have you abandoned me?"
That is an interesting analogy. Going back to the pastorship, and I love that analogy because, sheep are so like humans. If we look into behavior traits, we can go astray so easily. But technically, what happens in the countryside, some of you may know that, when the sheep goes away, do you know what the shepherd actually does? Especially with the sheep, when they are young, they literally break their legs. Mm-hmm. Literally. Sort of so that they learn to stay close. Otherwise, you just go away and keep repeating the behavior. Mm-hmm. So if you think about it, he cares for them enough to break their legs so that, to teach them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even that sort of these two is gotta keep watching. Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds strange, because if humans are really, maybe not a perfect, but still like image of a God, mm-hmm. why they have to be punished to do something good?
It's not punishment. It's what it is. It's we take it as punishment. Mm-hmm. We experience it as punishment, but it's not. It's being because when you're a kid, if your dad turned you over on his knees and spanked you, mm-hmm. you took it as punishment. But what he was, and his anger and his wrath and all of that stuff, right? But and if it was, then there's a problem with that, because if he's taking out his anger on his kid, that's abuse. On the other hand, if he's spanking the kid so that the kid won't repeat a harmful behavior, mm-hmm. so that it'll get it out of his system, then it's not a matter of punishment. It's a matter of correction.
Well, it still kind of leave a point that as so ascended creatures, maybe we don't need punishment to understand that something is wrong and something is good. Not
Right.
punishment, whatever, doesn't matter how you call it. That's the point. And second, I think what you were saying that it's actually go other ways, because it sounds like, you know, you come from a school and you say that you get A+ and then you got spanking. Is that what you was explaining, right?
Well, that's not what it's about. That's not. You wouldn't get spanked for getting an A+.
No, but you were saying that someone is doing everything all right, and you know, basically getting A+ in spiritual life.
No,
Fasting
okay,
and-
okay, those are two different points. Okay, in our own experience as Christians, we can go along for a while and everything is going along all right, and then suddenly things things start to happen in our lives, which are temptations.
Okay.
Okay, and the Lord lets the temptations happen to us to teach us and to purify us. Okay, that's one point. Second point is that it's like if a kid is misbehaving, I wasn't clear. If a kid is misbehaving, then a father is likely to put him over his knee and spank him, right? And that's not in order to hurt the child. It's in order so that child understands that what he was doing is wrong. In other words, it's a teaching mechanism.
And I think to those 2 points that are, you know, there are different facets to, this is really nice how it's been classified, Vladika. Like the first point is, you know, even St. Maximus, right, that in the new calendar we commemorated last week. It's very easy to, and very subtle how we can walk away from humility. Like St. Maximus, he had the wisdom and the enlightenment. When the governor came in to visit him, he actually purposely did not receive him, because he said, that's going to feed my pride. More people are going to start coming and think that I'm illumined, this, you know, and I know that I'm not. So it's like, it's keeping, and there is another story too of that was told by, I think it was Saint Anthony, the Holy Fathers, when Saint Anthony passed away, the enemy appeared to him and said, wow, you really beat me in every single way. You know, I tempted you in every possible way, and you were always, you know, humble and used humility, and now you're here, you know, and you won, you beat me. So it was like his last temptation in terms of thinking, getting the pride again. Oh, that's right. I defeated the enemy, and that would have been his fall.
Right.
You know, so in that context, some things happen. You know, and I speak, you know, from my own experience. Sometimes you think that you are on top of the world, and something has to happen. So you think that you see, not that you think, you see, hey, you're nothing. You're a little speckle over here. Look at how much more you have to learn. And the first and the second use case that you leverage in there, Vladika, which is, you know, more an example of a physical type of discipline, for lack of a better term. What happens in that is a child, the cognitive sense and the sophistication of the brain networks, you cannot sit down with them and rationalize the concept of sin and, you know, here's why this is wrong, here's why this is right, and a little slap, they will understand very well, oh, okay, I should not be doing that. You know, until they are mature enough that you can actually sit down and have a rational conversation with them. But I see the point that he's bringing up. Sometimes it seems very unfair. I say, what is happening here? I am putting my best forth, and I'm trying to be righteous. Why are all this evil happening around me? It's not easy. It's not easy. It's very, very difficult.
It's very hard.
Especially when people that are like the closest to you are the ones causing the most betrayals and things like this. It is not easy to understand.
Right?
But you know, the only thing that we can do in those times is really you know, foundationally knowing that if God is allowing it to happen, it's because He's looking after what is best for us.
That's
and
right.
for our salvation.
Yeah.
That's the only anchor, really.
Yeah. So let's read through the text and look at how he presents that. Verse 7. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. And the King James says you're all bastards. You know, and not sons. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits, and live? For they indeed for a few days chastened us, as seemed best to them, but He for our profit, that we may be partakers of His holiness. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterwards it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. In other words, it hurts. It hurts to be chastened. But if you take it right, if you accept it in the way that it should be accepted, then it becomes a means of purification, a means towards righteousness. And that's ultimately what God is trying to do. He's trying to train us in righteousness, and part of that means that we have to get rid of our pride and our ego and our self-centeredness and, you know, all of these false conceptions of ourself. Not to mention our self-righteousness, which is, you know, if we think we're doing really well and becoming really spiritual, that's when we need to be put in our place.
But the drawback in here, it can also lead to bitterness.
Yes, and that's what happens if we don't take it in the right way. So, verse 12. Therefore, strengthen the hands which hang down, and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. Now, this is a rather odd text.
This is the ship. It is the shepherd.
Yeah.
Guarantee you, because this is exactly what they do. That's probably the analogy that they are piggybacking here. Oh, well, this is great. Yeah, I think it is.
In other words, I think basically what he's saying, get focused. Don't just laze around. Don't give in to weakness, but make your path straight. In other words, and walk on it, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. In other words, so that you can lead those and yourself be led on the right path, on the straight path. I'm not exactly sure what the reference is to in this verse.
It's a good thing to research, Vladika, but I'm very tempted to say that because what the shepherd does, after he, or say broke, after he dislocated the leg, he brings it back to the flock, and he puts a cast. He sort of, treats it as a means of teaching. So it's the healing process that takes place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that could be what the analogy is referring to.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't see that in any of the commentaries that I read, so.
No, and I actually just thought about it, when we were talking, but because they used to make a lot of analogies to, the shepherd and the sheep, and this looks like so clear, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Dislocated, they use the word dislocated.
Yeah, because this is exactly what the shepherd does.
Mm.
If I can get to that text. In the commentaries. Okay. For those who want to see that InterVarsity commentary, I have it in small format here.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it would be nice to see what the Holy Father say.
Okay, you want to hear what Chrysostom says about these verses?
Very good.
Okay. Do not wonder if discipline, being itself hard, has sweet fruits, since in trees also the bark is almost destitute of all quality and rough, but the fruits are sweet. Why, after you have endured the painful, are you despondent as to the good? The distasteful things that you had to endure, you endured. Do not then become despondent when you are rewarded. He speaks as to runners and boxers and warriors. Do you see how he arms them, how he encourages them? Walk straight, he says. Here he says with reference to their thoughts, that is to say, not doubting. For if the discipline be of love, if it begin from loving care, it could end with a good result, and he proves both by facts and by words, and by all considerations, why are you dispirited? For such are they who despair, who are not strengthened by the hope of the future. Walk straight, he says, that your lameness may not be increased, but brought back to its former condition. For he that runs when he is lame galls the sore place. You see that it is in our power to be thoroughly healed. Now, St. Theodore of Mopsuestia, who was the great interpreter of the Syriac Church, says, "Where are those who say that the apostle in this epistle precludes repentance, by saying it is impossible to renew again thereafter to repentance those once enlightened? How then do you understand these words? Therefore lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees. What sort of healing of the lame does this apostle, who allegedly does not believe in repentance for those who have sinned, wish to take place? It is clear he writes these things to believers, in that he says to them, recall the former days, when after you were enlightened you endured a hard struggle with sufferings." Origen writes, these are the commentaries on these verses, on 12 and 13.
Yeah, theologically what they mean. Yeah.
Well,
what the message is.
These are the commentaries of the fathers, obviously out of the context of their writings, but Origen said, "Nevertheless, since Jesus recites the law to you and reveals to your hearts its spiritual meaning, do not remain proselytes, that is, catechumens, any longer, but hurry to receive fully the grace of God. And you children, do not be children in your thinking, be babes in evil, but in thinking be mature. As the apostle says to the Hebrews, let us leave the elementary doctrines of Christ and go on to maturity. But you too, who under the title women are weak, cast down and tired, you are exhorted to lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees." Ephraim the Syrian writes, "Therefore lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees, that is, make straight paths for your feet throughout the afflictions caused by your persecutors, so that they may not slip. Do this so that what is lame, that is, those who transgress through the denial of faith, may not be put out of joint and increase the power of sin, but rather be healed, so that through his healing sin may be affected by illness." Sin may, yeah. So that's an idea of what that commentary is like. It's not integrated quotes, but it's all, it's what various fathers had to say about those particular verses and some of the themes within them. Okay, let's move on. Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord, looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled, lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. For you know that afterward, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently with tears. In other words, all of these are what leads to a life of holiness, sanctity, and purification. Pursue peace with all people and holiness, and it's all just very, very clear. Without which no one will see the Lord. Looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. It's important to not let bitterness take any root within ourselves, any resentment, any bitterness, because it not only defiles the person who holds it, but it can, that bitterness can spread. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau. Now it's interesting, because in the text of Genesis, y'all remember Esau, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham had Esau and Isaac. Esau was the older, and Isaac was the younger, but Esau ended up essentially selling his birthright to go and catch food to bring to Isaac, to bring to Abraham, whereas as Isaac, spurred on by his mother, prepared food and just gave it directly to Abraham, and took the blessing of Esau by trickery, essentially.
And you see how this passes from generation.
Yeah.
Because there were cases in which Isaac did the same thing. Even what Abraham had done with his wife, sort of, oh, that's my sister. And his son did the very same thing as he did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's not mentioned in the text that Esau was regarded as a fornicator, but he was certainly regarded as a profane person, and thus kind of any kind of guilty of all sorts of things. And evidently, it's in the ancient Jewish tradition that Esau was also viewed as a fornicator and so forth. So verse 17, he comments on that. For you know that afterward, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently with tears. Isaac had taken his birthright, and he wanted to change that, but It wasn't possible. So, now, this is the last section of the chapter. For you have not come to the mountain that may be touched, that burned with fire into blackness and darkness and tempest, and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that the word should not be spoken to them any more. For they could not endure what was commanded, and if so much as a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot with an arrow. And so terrifying was the sight that Moses said, I am exceedingly afraid and trembling. He's referring to the descent of God on Mount Sinai, where Moses went up to receive the law. And what an awesome and terrifying sight was the presence of God, even though God was hidden by a cloud, and the people couldn't understand him, and yet they only heard him as thunder. If you go back to Genesis. But it's not that kind of revelation. That was the revelation to Moses. It's not that kind of revelation to the New Covenant. Verse 22, but you have come to Mount Zion, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven, to God the judge of all, and to the spirits of just men made perfect, to Jesus the mediator of the new covenant, and the blood of sprinkling that speaks better than that of Abel. Okay, we just read that whole passage from the book of Revelation. You've come to Mount Zion. This is the New Jerusalem, and so it's referring exactly to that eschatological reality of the New Jerusalem, which is yet to come. To Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, who by bringing his own blood sealed the new covenant and the sending of the Spirit. And the sprinkling of the blood that speaks better things than that of Abel. And that's interesting because there's a kind of a parallel being drawn here, as if Abel was a sacrificial victim, which he was not specifically, if you look at the text of Genesis. And Abel's blood cried out for vengeance, according to the text. Jesus' blood does not cry out for vengeance. The blood of Jesus, with which he entered into the eternal sanctuary in the heavens, brought instead sanctification and forgiveness and reconciliation. So let's go back to Revelations chapter 20 or 21.
Which chapter?
Chapter 21. And for you have come back to Hebrews, but you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. So we have the vision at the beginning of Revelation now. Actually, let's look at verse 9. They went up on the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints in the beloved city. And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. The devil who... verse 11. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven and the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged according to their works by the things which were written in the books. The sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades delivered up the dead, and they were judged each according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. Anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. And now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed. There also was no more sea. Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them. And they shall be his people, and God himself will be with them, and be their God, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away, and so forth. And so it's precisely to this reference that the author is referring when he says, You have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and an innumerable company of angels, and to the general assembly and church of the firstborn registered in heaven, to God the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect, and Jesus the mediator of the new covenant. See that you do not refuse him who speaks, verse 25. For if they did not escape who refused him who spoke on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven, whose voice that then shook the earth, but now he is promised, saying, Yet once more I shake not only the earth but also heaven. Now this yet once more indicates the removal of those things that are being shaken, as the things that are made, that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. In other words, it's what everything that is material, everything that is created will be shaken, will be and destroyed. But everything that is uncreated is that which endures forever. And there's absolute stability in that. And that's the only thing that has absolute stability. Verse 28. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace, by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. For our God is a consuming fire. Now, that last verse, for our God is a consuming fire, is a quote from Deuteronomy. And I think it's essentially meant to convey the utter awesomeness of the reality of God. That kingdom which he has created for those who are saved will be, eternal in the heavens as it is uncreated and cannot be shaken. That if we that we enter it, we participate in it, we become citizens of it by grace. He says, by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear. For our God is a consuming fire. In some ways it's a bit of a non sequitur. but but especially, and it kind of ties the beginning of the chapter, or ties with the beginning of the chapter, which talked about for you. Where is it? To verse 18, for you have not come to that mountain that may be touched and that burn. In other words, for you have not come to the tangible mountain that may that burned with fire into blackness and darkness and tempest. In other words, it's not Sinai, but it's the New Jerusalem, and yet it's the same God who appeared as a burning fire on Mount Sinai, who is the same God who brings forth the New Jerusalem from heaven. Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm. What is the Greek word for consuming? Antic.
Okay. Pir katanaliskon. Pir katanaliskon.
Okay, and what does it mean literally?
A consuming fire.
Consuming fire.
All consuming.
Yeah. Depending upon the context, it can mean something negative, right? I come in and I destroy, I consume the whole thing. But I see the meaning here. Elder Cleopa has, everybody who came to visit him,
Mm-hmm.
the last thing that he would say, it was, Chel Mankatine. Chel Mankatine, may the heavens, may paradise consume you.
Oh. So that's
Nice.
that's a different sense.
Yeah. Oh, but it's sort of the same as encompassing, right? Absorb you. And, yeah.
Now it makes sense in reference to the 21st chapter of Revelation. So we had 22 on is essentially there's a parallel with Revelations 20:21. Now, the verses just before that, it's the last judgment. And I saw a great white throne and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works by the things which were written in the books. The sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades delivered up the dead who were in them, and they were judged each according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. Anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. And then we read the next paragraph. Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. There was only no more sea, and so forth. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. Then he who sat on the throne, this is verse 5, 21:5. Then he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give of the fountain of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. He who overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Now we have, the fathers tell us that the lake of fire is, the fire of God is his love. But it's a burning, but to those who hate it, it's burning and consuming. So.
Well, the Revelation was saying that it's definitely, there is a division. Those who are not in the book of life are thrown to the fire, and those who are not thrown to the...
Right.
So does it mean that people who are in the book of life doesn't experience love of God?
No.
Because they're not thrown to the fire?
I think what we can say is that those who are not found in the book of life, they're in the presence of God, and what does the second death mean? I mean, essentially, I think that's the question. How can we understand that? How can we interpret it? I can't. So, Revelations would be a very interesting study.
Yeah. Yes. Because after during when Jesus was crucified, and then there was the resurrection, even the souls that were in Gehenna were resurrected, right?
Were raised, yeah.
Were raised with him. All of them?
According to the Greek fathers, yes. According to the Latin fathers, no.
So there was like a gift of grace that is not going to likely be extended again based on what is written here.
Well, it's, I mean, in the end, all, death and Hades, in other words.
Yeah.
I mean, in other words, all come to the general, the last judgment, the final, ultimate judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Wherever they are in between times is a different story.
Mm-hmm.
But the second death, it's an interesting concept. I'd have to do more research, way more research on this. There's a saying: you have to die so that you don't die when you die. In other words, you have to die first in this world, so that when you, which is through baptism, so that when earthly death comes, you're not subject to the second death. In other words, you have to die with Christ and be raised in Him, which means to be written in the book of life, so that when you experience physical death, you enter into heaven, and you're not condemned to the lake of fire, the second death.
Mm-hmm.
But you see the parallelism. between the two texts.
Yeah.
Now that is not brought out in most of the fathers. In fact, it's not brought out in any of the fathers that I've seen. That's something I noticed. But I think it's too. I think it's something that's really there. And so Revelation informs the text of Hebrews. And Hebrews was written in relation to the text of the Revelation.
Revelation was primarily St. John, right?
Well, it was. It says it was written by St. John. Yeah. And Hebrews is interesting. It's kind of this combination between Johannine theology and Pauline theology.
Did the apostles review each other's work when they were writing, or they were writing independently?
They wrote independently, but the church accepted or rejected texts. You know, there was a lot that was rejected because they didn't think that it was authentically the apostolic work. But whether they actually collaborated personally on it, I don't know. And it seems like Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it would have been rather odd if they had all been sitting together in Jerusalem or in Antioch collaborating.
Well, not like in person, but with
Right.
letters and hey, here's what I wrote. What are you up to? What are you writing? Or they just lost contact. Everybody went.
They were going in different directions. They didn't lose. There was contact.
Yeah, because they
for a
came back
while.
for the Dormition, right?
They came together for that first council.
Yeah, for the council.
But how many of them and who they were, it's not listed. There was Peter and there was James, and but it's not. Who else was there? Is unknown, and Mark, and you have they're all mentioned. I don't think Matthew is mentioned in the book of Acts, but Luke is mentioned in the book of Acts. Mark is mentioned in the book of Acts. Mark is mentioned in the Pauline writings. And so you have Matthew kind of stands on its own. Then there's Mark and Luke, both of which are dependent on another, and all three of those are dependent on another text, which the scholars refer to as Q, which has the common material between all three, and gives a kind of a chronology. But each one has its own perspective and its own peculiarities. So I think I can't remember offhand. One of them, either Mark or Luke, one of them was a disciple of Paul, probably Luke was a disciple of Paul, and Mark was a disciple of Peter. And so this was the gospel that they preached. And their particular emphases. And we don't have any texts from the other apostles, aside from the little bits in here from Peter and Peter, James, John, Jude. What about the other 8?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, they probably got lost, or they were so busy preaching that they didn't have time to write.
Either that, or they also that these were the ones that the church filtered out as the most important, most complete.
Does anybody keep the authentic writings, or?
I don't know that any other writings exist. And there are writings in the names of some of the other apostles, but some of them are pretty spurious. And the church doesn't remember any other writings that are actually authentically apostolic. And even like the Proto-Evangelion and things like that are not in the New Testament because precisely they don't believe that it was authentic. And that was very early. That was in the second, third century.
What was that called? The
Proto-Evangelion of James.
Oh, okay.
It gives all the history of Mary and her family and all of that, and all of our feast days of the Virgin Mary are based on that text.
Oh.
So it's an important text historically and theologically and ecclesially, but it's not in the scriptures per se.
We don't know who wrote it.
Well, it's attributed to James, the brother of the Lord, which would have been certainly possible. He, according to the tradition, he accompanied Mary and Joseph into Egypt with the child Jesus. He was a young boy who was with them and was dubious about Jesus during his ministry, but was very, not only faithful, but he was the head of the church in Jerusalem. He was the chief of the apostles. So, and then Peter kind of took over. And there were fights between them.
But they don't think it was written by James, or possibly?
No, the early fathers don't. No.
No.
Otherwise, it would likely be in the canon of Scripture.
Yeah.
So. Other questions?
I think who were the Hebrews? Were they those who kept to the tradition of the first temple? I think it's right to them.
Probably. They were Hebrews who were probably not Jews, who had converted to Christ. That's Hebrew Christians, but probably not of any of the parties of the Jews. They might have gone to synagogues, but that doesn't mean that they were scribes or Pharisees or totally like Paul identifies himself as a Pharisee in great detail. So and a Jew, whereas you don't have that in others of the writings. So.
Geographically, did the Hebrews encompass, do we know what areas of that general sort of Middle East they covered?
Well, the Hebrews, I mean, they were the people of Israel, so it depends on when.
Yeah.
And the whole, most of Palestine would have been called, the people would have called themselves Hebrews, who spoke Hebrew. After the exile, Hebrew was no longer spoken; it became a liturgical language. And the people, both the exiles as well as the people in Palestine, because I would assume because of the Chaldean domination or the Assyrian domination, were speaking Aramaic, and so the people. The Hebrews spoke Aramaic through the time of Jesus up until the destruction of the temple. Hebrew remained the liturgical and scriptural language. And then the Jews were dispersed all over the Roman world. My assumption, and from what history I've seen, is there were still many Hebrew people, Palestinians, who remained in Palestine, while the Romans converted Jerusalem into a pagan city, and Christianity remained in Palestine, unbroken. But the leadership had to move. So the leadership moved up to Damascus and to Antioch.
It had to move
Yeah.
at that point.
And that was in the year 70. And so you had Jews and Hebrews, I mean, Jews being a subset of Hebrews, or Israelites, dispersed all throughout the Roman Empire. But Jerusalem was emptied, basically.
After the Second Temple.
After the destruction of the temple in 70. So then you've got in the 10th century the conversion of the Khazars,
Oh, yeah.
where all these
Black Sea, sort of.
Yeah.
You know.
So
Ladika, what state was Jerusalem in when Helena went and found the true cross?
it was the Roman province of Palestine. It was called Aeolia Capitolina.
Oh, why?
It was the name of the city.
Not Jerusalem.
No,
Wow.
no, it was renamed. I mean, it was leveled and then it was rebuilt as a pagan city.
And that's its state when she came.
Yeah. But there were Christians who had remained and who retained the memory of, what happened where. Even though the site of the temple had a pagan temple on it.
Well, it was a real miracle that she found the cross.
Yeah. So, anything else?
From a point, coming back in here, which to me is it's an important aspect. Mentioning about the example of Esau, the trickery that took place, because there were mistakes in both sides, right?
Right.
One was sort of, there were lies, there were deceit. The other one selling his birthright for a bowl, of stew, whatever it is, which comes from Isaac's mother herself too, right? That so.
No, Esau cooked his own.
Well, no, Esau cooked his own. But what I mean is, even during the birth of Esau, because she took, Sarah took matters on her own hands. Oh, God promised you that He's going to give you a nation, but look at me, I can't give you a son, so let's go and lay with my slave. And so she took matters onto her own hands. So you see that trait sort of propagating. But what is interesting, Vladika, is despite all of this trickery, how God honored His promise.
Yeah.
Because if He was really that going back to the initial point that you brought up, if He was really that punitive God, forget it. Oh, okay, Sarah, you took it into your own hands, go and solve your problems. I don't want anything else to do with this. But He, there were major mistakes. What Abraham did, he basically got his wife into adultery, right, to save his own skin. Oh, that's my half-sister. And she became, part of, and by the way, her son, Isaac did the very same. with Rebecca to save his skin. So you see that those things, those traits repeating, but God honored his promise.
Mm-hmm. I don't think they would have considered it adultery at that time.
I mean, he first of all, he didn't tell. I mean, he was deceitful, but
He was
very
deceitful, but
That's
I don't
my
think-
sister. And she became Pharaoh's wife. Actually, he took her into his.
Who are you talking about now?
What is it? Sarah.
It was
Sarah?
Abraham.
Abraham?
Had Esau by Rahab and Isaac by Sarah.
By Sarah. Yeah,
And
it was
so-
with Sarah.
Yeah.
It was, Sarah.
And who was the heir? Who was his wife? Rahab was her slave,
Her slave, exactly.
not a sister.
No, and by the way, Rahab was her slave given to her by Pharaoh when he found out that she was actually, when all the bad things started happening, and nobody on his house would get pregnant anymore, and he found out that she was Abraham's wife. He actually sent her out, say, get out of here, go in peace, and by the way, he will take the slaves with you. That's how she came to be. And then they went back into the desert.
I'm gonna have to look that up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The whole story. It's fascinating because it always puzzles me, and it's mentioning here. Yeah, don't do those trickeries. But you see how God understands. He understood those weaknesses. He had made a promise to Abraham, and he fulfilled it, irrespectively of all this dynamics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Abraham said, "Oh, I just did that because I was afraid that you were going to kill me." When he saw her, and she was actually 60 years old when this happened.
Yeah.
Apparently, she was a very attractive woman. Yeah.
And the promise was what was the promise that God made?
The God made to Abraham. Well, he took him, outside. Yeah, please.
That he would be the father of many nations
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
through a son. Okay.
Yeah.
It's time to end. It is truly meet to bless thee, Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, and the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compared than the seraphim, without corruption, who gavest birth to God the Word. True Theotokos, we magnify thee. The blessing of the Lord be upon you through his grace and love for mankind. Always not ever teach.
Amen.